Good evening. Welcome to tonight's event of Happy Hour with the Historian. I'm Clint Howard, and I'm going to introduce our speakers for tonight. We have Brooks Blevins from Missouri State University and David Hutchison from Lyon College. They're going to be talking to us about some history of Lyon College for tonight. So I'll hand it off to them.
Thank you,
All right,
Clint.
thanks, Clint.
Yeah, and good evening, everyone. And I thought before we get into it, I just wanted to recognize for all of you that I am sitting next to the definition of a legitimate historian here, written books on the area and wrote the definitive history on Lyon College. I am at best a hobbyist, and so just going to be providing color commentary as we go along this evening. And so I've invited Brooks to kind of kick us off here with our first subject.
All right, yeah. Well, it's good to see everybody. When I had my glasses on, it was good to see everybody. I had to make the decision. I can either read my notes or see the audience, and I chose my notes. So don't be offended by that. But as we talked about some topics to cover tonight, because we can't cover everything, obviously. One of the things we thought about is what is it? What unique stories does Lyon College, Arkansas College, have to tell? And one of the unique stories that we have, one of the firsts that we have, and everybody always likes firsts, don't we? Was that in 1876, when Arkansas College held its first graduation ceremony. It was in December of 1876, as a matter of fact. In that class of 8 students were 3 young women, Susie Butler, Mary Maxfield, Cynthia Shearer, who also happened to be the first women to earn what we would call the BA degree in the state of Arkansas. And so this was it was not something that I don't think the UPI or AP picked up on that in 1876. But that is it's a sign that from its very beginning, Arkansas College was not only coeducational. Coeducational in the 19th century often meant that women take, even if they're in the same school, that women take a different course of study than men. But that was not the case at Arkansas College, and as a result, we're able to claim the first women bachelor's degree graduates in the state of Arkansas.
I wanted to draw a little bit more attention to how unique that was. We weren't, by any stretch of the imagination, the only school to be doing that from our founding, but it was very unique. Most colleges, especially denominational colleges, which at that time were kind of in the height of their formation through the mid-18 and the late 1800s, were formed typically, especially in small towns, where you would have a small all-male school and a small all-female school, especially throughout the Midwest and the Upper South. And it would be common later on where these institutions would eventually either become coeducational or they would merge together to become one institution. That's how the Methodists tended to do it. It's kind of how Hendrix came to be the coeducational institution and the merged with all the different Methodist institutions coming together. So it really does kind of stand out as a very unique element of Arkansas College's history and Lyon College's history, is that from its very inception, it had both genders essentially being coeducated there in the same institution. Very unique.
Yeah.
I one part that, and this is a story that's been fascinating me. We're going to fast forward to the 1960s, so you know it's going to be good. It's not something that's terrible. What was that? Oh yeah, this is some far out time in Lyon College's history. This is not something that's necessarily unique specific to Lyon College, but it is something that was unique to the era and especially to colleges in this region during that era, which is that a surprisingly high percentage of our student body from around 1966 to about 1975 was made up of students from the Northeast, from states like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts. And at first you look at that and you think, well, how did they end up in Batesville, Arkansas, of all things? This was practically a foreign country to these young men. and it was primarily men, and that's because they were looking for a deferment from the draft during the Vietnam War. And so they would find themselves here. And actually what would happen was an admissions counselor would put an ad in the newspaper, let's say in Philadelphia. For a long time, this was Jim Mitchum, or Fireball, as he was known. And he would put an ad in the Philadelphia paper and say, I'm going to be at the Holiday Inn, come downtown and hear from Arkansas College. We're looking to recruit students in this area. Because all the schools up there were full. They had nowhere to go. I've visited with a number of these gentlemen up in the Northeast, and they had nowhere to go. They were looking for any school that would take them. And Arkansas College was willing. And Fireball, would be there at the hotel, and they would come in and they'd bring their transcripts. They were often not great transcripts. And they would hand them over, and Fireball said, grab a sandwich and a Coke, and I'll be right back with you. And about a minute later, he'd be back shaking their hand. Congratulations, you're a student at Arkansas College. And these guys, you can just imagine what it was like to show up. You get off the plane or the train in Memphis, and somebody's there to pick you up in a car, and you make your way from Memphis through Mark Tree, and it's getting darker, and then you get to Newport, it's getting very dark, and you're just wondering, what have I done to myself? Where am I? And you finally make it to Batesville, and you get out, and it would be the guys would get out and ask, well, this is, it's Independence County, it's a dry county, and guys say, well, what does that mean? You mean it doesn't rain here? There was a lot of characters that would come from this.
Yeah. It's if you knew Jim Mitchum, and many of us did, it's a wonder that anyone was left to go to college in the Northeast. He could convince anybody to do anything, and there was also in 1962 was actually the first year. I remember Jim interviewing Jim for the college history. They sent him up to the Northeast in '62, and they went every year a few times into the late '60s, and it got to the point in the mid and late '60s when out-of-state students outnumbered Arkansas students on campus, and I guess that's probably the only time that's ever happened in the history of the college. There were 3 consecutive years in the mid and late '60s when the students from New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania and Connecticut outnumbered Arkansas students, and it really was not only a demographic change, but a culture change. And I remember when I was working on the history of the college, having people tell me that a lot of people around Batesville weren't excited about this culture change. Some of the merchants and other folks didn't like dealing with the Yankee boys, and there were young women who came down as well. Of course.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
That we were purely naive.
This was
and
a clean
innocent
school before that. Yes.
Before they came in.
Before the Jersey kids came down.
I better not get into some of Jim's stories from his days as a student before they came. But yeah, it was an interesting era, and one that I think, and Terrell will remember this. We sort of capped it off in style in March of 1972 when one of our New Jersey students, a freshman by the name of Carl Farina, set the Guinness World Record for the longest shower.
That's right.
This actually happened. You can, if you've got newspapers.com, you can go in there and find the AP stories of Dennis Farina spending more than 3 days in a shower on a Friday.
72 plus hours.
Yeah, on a Friday afternoon, he got in the shower and he got out on a Monday afternoon.
That's right.
And he broke the record. He stayed in just long enough to break the record.
Well,
he was pickled.
The only reason he stopped, he was interviewed by the AP, and he listed as the only reason he stopped, other than the fact he had read that a co-ed from the University of Illinois had set the record back in 1965, and so he knew he could beat it, so had 72 plus minutes that he was shooting for. The only reason he didn't go for a lot more was that the college was charging him $1 for every hour of water that he was using, over 24, and he only had $55. And so this was his limit. This was as far as he could go. And there's the current record, of course. The current record was set a few years later in 1985. Yeah. And does anybody care to guess how many hours the current record is for consecutive hours in the shower? Now his was 72 hours, 72 hours and 52 minutes, something like that. Yeah. 341 hours. That's 14.2 days.
That is dedication. That's got to be somebody from Hendricks,
a college
right?
kid. Yeah.
I'm not sure who that is, but Carl Farina has been forgotten by the Guinness World Record books, but not forgotten by Arkansas College and Lyon College. And I'm pretty sure had he waited another year, that wouldn't have happened. I can't imagine this happening under Dan West's administration. This Bill Weigel was still president in 1972, and as a matter of fact, I think he resigned the very next month. and I wonder if somewhere in the archive of the college
records are sealed.
Yeah, he may have gotten called on the carpet when Arkansas College made the wrong kind of national headline with that, but that is one of our prouder moments as a college.
A distinct honor.
That's right. Yeah.
We have to remember too that he was not known as Carl. No, Flipper.
Flipper. That's right. Yes, he went by Flipper, and sadly he's no longer with us. But he's just an example of some of the colorful characters that came down at that time. I mean, this was a person who shared campus with Bill Bristow from Strawberry, Arkansas, one of our most distinguished graduates of all time. So what a volatile time that would have been for the student body.
Yeah. It's one of our favorite stories, for obvious reasons.
Well, I think something that's been in the news a lot, moving from funny stories to kind of more overarching things and painting in broad strokes, something that's been in the news an awful lot, especially the last several years, has been just all the pressures that colleges are under these days, especially when it comes to sort of the twin challenges of enrollment and financial stress, especially liberal arts colleges. Since 2067, colleges and universities have closed in the United States, which is an average of a baker's dozen a year. It's just an incredibly difficult time for colleges and universities, and I'm not sure if it's fortunate for Lyon College or unfortunate, but the reality is that facing that head on is kind of something that's in our DNA. I always like to tell folks that being on the fiscal cliff, as it were, is something that Lyon has done really for 149 years, really since its very beginning. And it's kind of fought enrollment struggles, and it's fought pledge campaigns, whether by the Presbyterians that would be pledged and never materialize, or just the struggles of bringing in tuition dollars, is just something that's always been a part of our story.
Yeah, going back to our three women graduates in 1876, it's a nice first, but it wasn't because Isaac Long and the founders of the college were proto-feminists or anything like that. The reason why it was co-ed from the very beginning is because that's the only way it was going to survive.
Had to happen.
They needed female students, or the college wouldn't survive. And it is true that throughout the history of the institution, that has been the dominant story. All these near-death experiences that the college has had, and you can go all the way back. When I wrote the chapter on the Great Depression era, it was it was a difficult one to write, not necessarily, I mean, I knew how the story was I knew we were going to survive. We're still here. But it was the same story year after year after year after year.
Yeah.
And you go back to, it was 90 years ago this year in 1931 when the college received its first death vote, if you want to call it that. The Senate of Arkansas literally voted to close down the college at a meeting in 1931. And they suddenly kind of panicked when they realized what they had done. Nels and Kitty Barnett were there and were sort of the main ones who rallied and convinced folks that they had made a grave mistake and saved the college. They really saved the college. John P. Morrow was at that same meeting and helped save the college. But the reason that it was that vote took place in the first place was the college was $200,000 in debt at that time. And I did, you can go on the internet and look up those, CPI. What would it be now? And today that would be $3.5 million, but that really doesn't tell the story. $200,000 was basically half the college's endowment. So if you could imagine Lyon College now being in debt by half of its endowment, that's kind of what the situation was in 1931. And how did we get there? Well, it started in the 1920s, and when you're a small college and you're in a rural state that relies on agriculture, capricious Mother Nature can bring you down, and the college had first gotten in debt in the early 1920s when it spent way too much money on a really nice new dormitory, Independence Hall. And some of you remember Independence Hall. Bill Bristow, we mentioned him earlier. He saved Independence Hall for one more semester, I think. He got a petition signed, and they let the boys stay in Independence Hall one more year in the early 70s before they closed it down. But Independence Hall, which was up there close to where Kroger is now, they spent, from that moment, the college was in debt, really, for the next 20 years. And then you get the Mississippi River flood of 1927, which ruins agriculture and around the state that year. A couple years later, you get terrible droughts in the early years of the Depression. So by 1931, $200,000 in debt. In 1932, again, 11 months later, here we are. The Senate is ready to vote and close the college again, and it does, and then has second thoughts, and we go through the process over. But throughout the 1930s, you just had this constant, the sword of Damocles over the head of the college, and you look back and at so many times the college should have closed. The Senate should have closed the college. I mean, really, the financially responsible thing to do would have been to just shut the college down. But there was always somebody like the Barnetts or Uri McKenzie. Yeah, you think of this. It was Batesville folks throughout the 30s who every year supplied $10,000 to offset operating expenses. In the 1931-32 school year, this is how crazy things were in the Depression. In the 1931-32 academic year, the president of Arkansas College was also the superintendent of the Batesville school system. He had both jobs at the same time. And
did a good job too.
When he decided, the public school system sounds a whole lot safer than a struggling, almost dead liberal arts college. He left the college, and other people stepped in to save the college. It was always somebody, and it was almost always somebody from Batesville who stepped in. And finally, in 1938, in the summer of 38, John P. Morrow and Alexander Henry traveled across the country, getting people that the college owed money to agree to a debt restructuring. And from the summer of 38, it took them 7 years to pay off the debt until the note burning took place right around the end of World War II. But my favorite story plays into this. This is my all-time favorite Arkansas College story, and it was the 1938 basketball team. And unfortunately, none of these fellows are left. But back in 2003, we had a big to-do at the college for the surviving members of the 1938 basketball team. But in 1938, the gym of Arkansas College is what the students called the barn. And that's probably making it sound better than it actually looked. I don't think most farmers today would want to keep their hay, much less any of their animals, in that building. I remember talking to players who said they could remember going in the gym on a winter morning and having to sweep the snow off the court because it had blown in through the cracks in the walls. It was an uninsulated gym. It was made and it was built in the late 1920s with student labor and basically free lumber that someone had given them, and it was meant to be a temporary gym. But 10 years later, they were still playing in it. And the out of bounds lines were about that far from the wall on each end, just a little cracker box gym, but it was the first state championship basketball team the college ever had, and they played in that gym. And all 5 of the starters, their 5 main players, were all local guys. Carl Garner of Greer's Ferry Dam Visitor Center, was the center on that team from Sulphur Rock, Moorfield area, out in there. 3 of the starters were from Cave City, the Taylor brothers, Charles and Cheney, longtime doctors here in Batesville. Con Bray, who had a successful business career after he left here. And the 5th starter was Hayden Estes from Ash Flat. They were all local boys. Peyton Golden, who was a longtime mayor here in Batesville, was one of their first players off the bench. They had a fella by the name of Arliss Glover who lived here in Batesville. I say lived here in Batesville. He was almost 30 years old, and they called him Pop. I think he was already married and maybe had kids by that time. But a bunch of local boys who managed to pull off a David versus Goliath victory against what at that time was called Arkansas State Teachers College. We call it UCA today. This was UCA, or Arkansas State Teachers College, had won the previous 3 state championships and were expected to win it again. The state tournament was held in their gym in Conway. And these 5 local kids were able to beat the powerful Arkansas State Teachers College team, win the state tournament. And one of the things, we know that athletic success causes people to sometimes do unusual things, and it is still my opinion that it was the state championship in March of 1938 and the positive publicity that these guys gained. The AP wrote stories about them in '38 and joked about how some of the boys had never seen a choo-choo train before they came to college and that sort of stuff. Some of them were recruited out of the hayloft and that kind of thing. But it was that positive publicity that really energized the Arkansas College community and made them receptive in the summer of '38 to this debt restructuring plan. We know that athletic success can do that with alums, and so that was a very important event in the college's history.
The coach was my father-in-law,
Robert Lee Calloway. Yeah, that's right, from Bethesda.
He was a student.
That's right. Yeah, and I left out the whole best part. They had a student for a coach.
Yeah. And he went downtown knocking on doors to get the money to buy the uniform.
And when they
I've heard that story many times.
Yeah, and it's true. And when they won the state, they got a trip to the national tournament in Denver, and the college was so broke that they could only afford to send 8 of the players, along with the coach and 2 chaperones who went with them. I'm not sure why they needed 2 chaperones besides the coach, but but only 8 of the players got to make the trip. And they actually, one of their players lived in Oklahoma, and they were able to save a little money by staying with his family on the way out and on the way back. That's probably the reason he got to go on the trip. But it was a really a feel good story in '38, playing in the barn and winning the state championship. Now I probably shouldn't even mention the down part of this. The NAI national tournament had just started the previous year in 1937. 1938 was the second NAI national tournament, and we didn't get to go to the national tournament. We actually went to the AAU national tournament because this was the AAU state tournament that Arkansas College won. We beat a civilian conservation corps team in the first round that year, and I think we beat a feed mill team out of Little Rock that year. But UCA State Teachers College actually got to go to the NAI national tournament because they won the conference championship that year. But it was a very different era. The AAU was basically a professional league in those days, but the NBA didn't exist. And but it was a neat story, and probably the most fun I ever had as a staff member at Lyon College was when we brought those guys back in '03, and that was quite a thrill. And there were several of them who were still alive at that time. Yeah.
Well, it's funny the way you talk about it playing a role in inspiring people to give to the college and saving the college, because Lyon has had some great teams throughout the years, but athletics has never really been something that has been closely associated with the college. We've never really been seen as a quote-unquote athletics college, and so it's kind of an interesting part of our story there that an athletic team having so much success just that one year would play such a fundamental role in saving the college.
Yeah.
Well, I want to move on to, as you can tell, we're kind of bouncing around the chronology here a little bit, but we are going to move forward just a little bit and take a look at the move from the original campus, which, as I think most of you will know, was down here in the downtown where the First Presbyterian Church is now. And kind of the interesting story about the move to Butler Hill, I think, is what it's called in the book, up there where the college is currently located, which happened in 1954. The formal move day, I think they had begun moving a little bit before that to where the Masonic orphanage was. M-Day, they called it, which was just the one big day when everything was going to be packed up, and Stanley Wood provided a number of trucks, and there were volunteers from the community that gathered together, and I think I understand it that there was so much help, so many trucks and volunteers. They had kind of planned for a big long day of moving it, and then there was going to be a picnic at the end of it and a celebration of M-Day, and they got it done so quickly that it only took about half the day, and everybody kind of just had to loiter around for a while they waited for the picnic to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of that's just because the college was so small. There wasn't that much stuff to move. It was you're talking about an enrollment of fewer than 200 students at that time.
Well, and they'd already begun having some courses out at the orphanage.
That's
already.
Right. The Masons had an orphanage out there for several years, and by the post-World War II years, the number of children who were living out there was really small, and they didn't need that big 100-acre campus and those 3 big buildings out there. And so in 1946, the college had started renting those buildings to use as dormitories. This was the GI Bill years when all the guys are coming back from World War II. Classrooms around the country are being flooded by all these GIs coming back. The GI Bill, one of the forgotten but most important pieces of legislation really in American history. And so they started renting these buildings as dorms. Eventually the college bought some old Army buses and had paid students, GIs, to drive back and forth, delivering students for the old downtown campus to the dorms out there. And then finally in 1948, the college just went ahead and bought bought the whole 100 acres out there where Lyon College's campus is today, and gradually started kind of heading out that way. Built Spraggins Hall, the first dormitory built as a dormitory on the campus, and then finally you get to M-Day. And one of the people, Stanley Wood, was very involved. Dr. Ketz, Wesley Ketz, was the one who was tasked with raising money to fund the move, and I think he raised something like $20,000, which was a whole lot of money in 1954 to help fund the move. Maybe half of that went toward the barbecue. I'm not really sure what they did. But I remember interviewing Fitzhugh Spraggins. He was a student at the time, and he was part of the crew that helped move the college from the old campus to the new campus. And it was just one of those things that people who were involved in it remembered for years and years. But it signaled a new beginning, and the campus that we all know now, that's when that starts growing in 1954.
Well, and speaking of that campus and the orphanage buildings, which if you don't remember them, you weren't around at that time, or don't remember the way they looked, they were magnificent structures. The pictures, they're wonderful buildings. Especially the three main halls there, left and right, and then a magnificent center building with college offices and some classrooms, and the president's office and a number of things, and this wonderful set of porches out in front of it. It was really a lovely set of buildings, and they brought, for a college that dates back to 1872, as it was said on the museum's Facebook page earlier this week. It's the oldest college in the state of Arkansas, still operating under its original charter. For all of that, it's actually a college with relatively lack of history when it comes to its physical campus. It's not on its original campus. It didn't move to its new campus until 1954, its current campus, which is not really that long ago. And the few buildings that actually were lending an awful lot of history and gravitas, kind of, when you walk onto a college campus, those ancient structures that give it that sense of age and timelessness, those buildings only made it into the 70s. And really, I think that kind of takes us to Maundy Thursday in 1973, which a few of you remember that well. We have survivors in the room, a row of them. If you're not aware of that, that is the day that a tornado came through Batesville and struck Arkansas College campus. Miraculously, both of those two side buildings were damaged really beyond repair. The center building was damaged, but at the time was at least initially thought to still be salvageable. And we're going to get into that just a little bit. But miraculously, no serious injuries and no fatalities, which is just an incredible thing, because it was an incredible bit of damage. Tell us a little bit about that, Brooks.
Yeah, that was the only building on campus that wasn't damaged at least a little bit was Becknell Gymnasium, which was still pretty new at that time.
Practically brand new.
And so it sort of missed the that kind of southern part of the campus there. But it was in the book I used Dr. West's story that he told me of his experience. He had been president there for just a few months. That was his first year, and he was brought in to do lots of things with the curriculum and all that kind of stuff, not to build buildings, but you do what you have to do, and he ended up having to build buildings after that. But he told me that he was underneath his I think it was the bursar's desk, is where he flung himself when he realized that this was something really, really serious. And by most accounts, the middle of the buildings, the biggest one, the Isaac J. Long Memorial Building is what they had named it, probably could have been salvaged and maybe should have been salvaged. But Dr. West wanted to level the three of them and start kind
over.
of fresh, and it held up the insurance claim for about a year, and that's why we only get the replacement building.
Nichols.
And unfortunately, the box that is the Nichols building.
The administration building would be the least preferred.
The
Right,
extremely
that's-
progressive
right.
academic square that is Nichols,
Yeah,
with all of its architectural splendor.
yeah, but that's how we got the Nichols building. It was the replacement for
Nichols
that.
architect that designed all the McDonald's buildings, didn't he?
I think so. You do have arches.
It was ahead of his
You
time.
do have arches on that Nichols building, and cubicles, and it's very much a
Very
work of the
functional.
70s.
Very
It's very
functional.
much of its time, and it is. I don't remember the old buildings. I was too small and I wasn't around at that time, but it is unfortunate
Well,
that we
yeah.
don't have that sort
It is.
of physical
Yes.
history to reflect the college's
It's
a
a relatively
rich
young
heritage.
campus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the cross and the steeple, really, for
Yeah.
Brown Chapel was
Yeah.
torn off in the tornado. Yes,
That's right. Yeah.
and 2 columns. That's right.
And I think there's a picture in the history book of the college that has the outside of the Brown Chapel. Maybe around graduation that year, it was still still ways from being fixed. But we still have the tornado cross out at the college. It's in that little thing in the library.
The garden that's
Yeah,
between
the
the new and old sections of the library.
That's, and I think Terrell, I believe that's the one that was in Fitzhugh's office for many, many years.
I looked for it, and
Yeah.
I had to go to the Smith Science one day, and Jane's office was on the end, and Ditches was me. Went
Yeah.
in there and said, "You got it."
Yeah. I guess he kept it until he retired.
He moved it to Alpha.
Yeah, I remember it being in there. Yeah, but that was And the thing about it is that campus that we have now, and that the tornado hit, on a few occasions came very close to not being the
Absolutely.
campus. One of the stories that was a recurring story throughout the history of the college, at least since the late 1920s, was the issue of merger with what we know as the University of the Ozarks, what for many years was just called the College of the Ozarks during the years of merger talks. And there were at least 3 different eras in which there were serious considerations of merging Arkansas's 2 Presbyterian institutions of higher education.
One, at least 2 of those times, it had actually was
That's right.
decided this merger would happen.
That's right. The most serious one was in the early 1950s, 70 years ago this year, this month really is when it all went down. In 1951, the Senate of Arkansas and the Senate of Oklahoma, back in those days, we were not in the same Presbyterian denomination. The College of the Ozarks was a Northern Presbyterian school. We were a Southern Presbyterian school here, and so they were under the control or under the directorship or whatever of the Senate of Oklahoma. And the 2 senates had decided to appoint committees to look into the possibility of merger. Both schools were really, really struggling in the early 50s. The GI Bill era was starting to come to an end. Korea was taking young men back out of the classrooms, and both were sort of on life support by the early 50s, and that's really what they were looking to do, is just save the schools by merging them. And they got a couple of experts to come in the summer of 51 to look at both campuses and make suggestions. Well, a few years earlier, a report written by George Peabody College had recommended merger of the college and that it be located at Clarksville. But when Arkansas College bought the 100-acre Masonic property in 1948, that changed the whole situation there. And so by 1951, the people who came in said, we think the schools should merge, but they should locate here in Batesville with this brand new campus. You can start fresh. You can do whatever you want. You got 100 acres. You got some old buildings out here. So let's put it in Batesville. We're going to call it the College of the Ozarks in Batesville. And so that was the idea. In 51, There were many Presbyterian leaders in the state of Arkansas who were for this.
Well, they never wanted it in Batesville from the very beginning, really.
Yeah, the Presbyterian establishment had never been happy with Batesville as a location.
It's always kind of seen as a fairly Presbyterian-less area of
Yeah, and it really is. Once you got outside of the bounds of Batesville, you go north of here, there weren't any regular old Presbyterians.
I mean, really, they wanted it in
days.
Little Rock.
And Little Rock would have been the preferred place, and so they end up the Arkansas College board and the Senate of Arkansas say, yeah, it sounds fine to us. Let's do that. Let's merge. And sort of at the last minute, the Senate of Oklahoma put the kibosh on it, and it was because they had recommended the location here in Batesville. And if you think about it, if it had been the other way around, probably the Senate of Arkansas would have said, nah, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go to Clarksville. So it may have been sort of a losing proposition, but it seemed on paper that they got very close to merging this time, and then it came back up in the 1970s. And in the 1970s, again, the folks affiliated with Arkansas College and the Southern Presbyterian Church were in favor of the merger. And this time, though, the idea was to move it to Little Rock. Now, I don't know how, the word didn't circulate all that much in the 70s. They learned their lesson. In 51, this was in the papers.
Very public.
The Arkansas Gazette had big stories on this, but they learned their lesson, and so all the talks were very high level and secretive. In the 70s, it was Dr. West talking with Dr. Davis from Ozarks. And again, at the last minute, it was the people at Ozarks who said, we don't want to do this. So the Batesville's college came very close to being closed down in the 1970s and relocated to Little Rock. And again, it was because of financial struggles. At that time, Ozarks was really struggling a lot more than Arkansas College was. Ozarks was just almost closed in the 70s, and the talks came up a few more times. And really, by the early 1980s, both schools had rebounded well enough that the merger talks went away at that point. But there were occasions when it looked like the Arkansas College days were going to be over.
And it's just a recurrent theme through half of the stories that we've talked about tonight, and throughout your book, as you write about the history of the college out through 2002. This is just a cyclical, recurrent theme of it being a school, whether it's at the downtown middle campus or the current campus. It's a school that, for various reasons, just constantly is almost no more, and yet time after time, for various reasons, whether it's Batesville people rescuing it, or it's a pledge drive, or it's new leadership, or enrollment surges following the war, or merger talks collapsing, it's just a constant cycle of things being saved, and almost always, like this is the cardiac college. This is just always at the very last minute these things are happening.
And that's
Destination.
I'll go with that. I'll go with that. It's why the word perseverance is in the subtitle of the history, and I think it was Dr. Rutger who may have recommended. I think we sort of collaborated on the subtitle, and he knew well enough, even after just a couple of years at the college, that it is a place that requires a community effort, and it always has. And it really is a testament to so many people that the college has survived, and not only survived but thrived. And it really, I would say, in the last 40 years, it has really thrived beyond anything that even a lot of those leaders and a lot of the people who saved the college could ever have imagined. But there are so many of them. There's just a list of people that you could put who at one time or another were responsible for saving the college. I didn't even mention Thomas Lowry, but he was an interim president for 3 years before he got lucky and had to go to World War II. And I'm pretty sure he felt that way when he shipped out in 1942. But he saved the college on a couple of occasions. He was a president who taught a full load of classes. If you can imagine that. I mean, it's just so many instances like that where people went above and beyond what would be expected of them to make sure that that college survived and to make sure that it was an excellent school.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to the part of the evening where we open it up to you all. It's been rather interactive already, but we wanted to leave time for questions and dialogue, just to have conversation. So we open it up to you all.
Let me just ask, you all mentioned the University of the Ozarks, but just last year, or maybe early this year, there was some story in the paper that the two schools were going to work together on something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So I'll take that. And first, I'd just like to note that Mr. Barnett has chosen to wear a face mask with Hendrix's logo on it. And I take that personally. Thank you.
It's the only one I have.
I do not believe you, sir. Yeah, that was announced earlier this year, and to my understanding, that's just a conversation that's developed between the two boards, and it's about exploring collaborative efforts between the two. This is something that is not unique in higher education. There's a number of schools, especially as you get out to the Northeast, where you have lots and lots of small colleges in a relatively small geographical footprint, and they're trying to serve a shrinking population of students, and so they're trying to find ways to save costs and to get rid of duplicated efforts. And so there are various what are often called consortiums or collaborative efforts where you'll have 5 or 6. The Five Sisters is probably the most famous example of this, which is, I don't know if they're all in Massachusetts, but they're primarily in Massachusetts, and it's prestigious liberal arts colleges that have banded together, and they allow professors to teach at each of the schools. They share some of their administrative resources. You know, in the modern era, it would be that you, instead of both schools having a license for example, your CRM, the database that runs everything, they're extremely expensive and can accommodate a much larger and more complex organization than either one of these schools. So it makes sense that both schools would perhaps be able to share that load and thus reduce the cost by, I don't know, something on the order of $500,000 a year for each institution. So it's not chump change. That's half of the annual fund. And so that's my understanding of what, I'm not part of those conversations, but yeah, it's just a conversation that's kind of ongoing. I think it's very much in its infancy, but just about how we can be more cooperative with one another and more collaborative and how we go about being the Presbyterian colleges in the state of Arkansas.
And not a cloud on the horizon.
Not to my knowledge,
Yeah,
no.
good.
I don't like clouds.
It was my impression that in addition to the budgetary advantages, that you could also do some things with distance education. You know, if you have 5 students here who want to take a class that's not offered here, but Ozarks has that class, then you put students from, you put students from both schools in that class, and suddenly it makes it more.
Absolutely.
And it increases the size of the curriculum for students at both schools.
As well as what can be offered. You're absolutely right, because there's a number of programs that Lyon offers that the University of the Ozarks doesn't, and vice versa. And so it allows for some programs to be shared while only one institution actually has to have it offered in its curriculum and hire that faculty. So it's a good question.
I want you to notice.
I did actually see that, and I do appreciate that, although I don't know how hygienic that is. But.
I serve on the Building and Grounds Committee over at the Presbyterian Church, have for 20-some odd years, some of them odder than others. But we have the original building that was, the original surviving building. Morrill Hall is what we call it after the Morrill family. And it's on the historic record, it was the second building in look back. But one of the best stories I have is that the fellowship hall, we call it, is part of the gymnasium that survived up until '54. And being on the committee, I wondered why they tore half the gymnasium down for years. And Billy Jett, who was one of my dear favorites, one time I mentioned that, and she said, "Oh, honey, we played half court basketball. That's the total size." That story is stuck with me. You know.
Yeah, that is right. That was
Court, yeah.
Irwin Gymnasium is what they called it when it was first built before World War I.
Yeah.
Actually, and eventually they converted it to a library. And at the time,
Yeah.
the bragging point for the college was that it was the first building that was a standalone library at a college in the state of Arkansas. It didn't mean we had more books than anybody else. We certainly did not. But everybody else had a library that was just part of another
That's
building that they shared with something else.
That was
But
100 years ago this year. This is the centennial, 1921 is the year that they did that.
of the library, I didn't remember that part. That's good. Yeah.
Did my research.
There you go. Yeah. You were trusting that I had the date right. And I hope I did. Yeah.
Part of the history of the college that I was interested in, particularly since we found a 1871 Batesville newspaper under the floorboards of the attic.
Of the Garrett House.
Of the Garrett House.
Which was the first thing.
Is that Isaac Long was the head of the Batesville Academy that pre-existed Arkansas College. And so he was a step up, as it were, into a college presidency from an academy head, whatever he was called. But there's an ad in that paper for the opening day of the Batesville Academy, the year before it transitioned into Arkansas College, which still maintained the academy capacity.
That's right.
So I've wondered if the coeducational nature of the college, in part, was just a natural extension of the coeducational Batesville Academy.
Yeah, it was, and the reason that Batesville Academy was co-ed, there a few years earlier there had been a Batesville male and a Batesville female academy, and they had merged those two for economic reasons, really. And I think it was Long's sister-in-law who ran the female school, and they put those in. But yeah, you're exactly right. It was just natural to extend that. Yeah.
The same paper has the ad for the opening day of Soulsboro Institute, which for a lot of people think it closed down in the Civil War and never reopened, but it clearly did reopen.
Yeah.
Briefly.
At least for that one opening day.
The Presbyterian
One glorious day.
Went up in smoke.
I'm not very familiar with the history of the college, but something that interests me is the Lassies.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure how many years they lasted or what impact they had.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
One of our more notable, we were talking about
that
earlier
today.
Yeah.
It's one of those. It's something that I remember from when I was a kid. It's one of the things that the college was really known for back in those days in the 60s and 70s. I don't remember the exact run of years but Dorothy Landis Gray was the one who started and was the director, or music director, or whatever you call it, of the Lassies. But it really was probably the biggest outreach that the college had in terms of its national and international appeal in the 60s and 70s. It was the Lassies who went on the USO tours, on several of those in the 60s and 70s, and really, and they performed a lot at not only at Presbyterian churches around the state and the region, but in other venues as well, at Rotary conventions and all that kind of stuff. And it really, it's a shame that we don't have something quite the equivalent of that today. But I don't know that
Well-
you could get away with taking students that sort of professionalizing a student singing group in the way that they basically did in those days.
I would say that the advent until the advent of the pipe band, really it was the most the highest profile thing for the college, and I would suggest that the pipe band really has for a number of years, especially when it was at its largest and going and playing in St. Patrick's Parade in New York City and going and performing in the British Isles and competing around the world. I think that kind of has taken on some elements of that role, but even then, certainly not to the degree of the USO tours. And there's wonderful pictures of it. The Lassies are probably, as far as I'm a musician, and so I have the heart for this. But as far as I'm concerned, it's probably one of the coolest aspects of what Arkansas College was able to accomplish, because they were performing on a schedule that even a large research university would have considered onerous for its students. And they're not known for caring for the educational process of undergraduates quite as much as a small liberal arts college does. So it's very impressive what they were able to accomplish.
In its later years, it was Lads and Lasses.
Yes, I was gonna
Right.
say that.
Yes.
And isn't Dorothy Landis still living?
She is.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And doing well on
Yes.
Facebook, friend.
Performing at the retirement center on the
The
piano.
last I heard, she was playing the piano in a bar.
Now, is that a coffee bar?
But I don't think she's doing that now, but she did up until recently.
From what I understand, she paid for a lot of things out of her own pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. One of the great names of AC history.
Yeah.
They had beautiful dresses. I mean, they
Yeah.
looked good,
Yeah.
especially when they were on tour.
Well, room for one more. I think we're about at 8 o'clock.
Well, I was going to mention, we have in our home the risers and the steps out of the center building that was destroyed by the tornado. We came here in '73 and it was a trash, and we were building our house, and I saw those risers and steps. I thought, I just carried them all home, happened to be
Little piece of history.
Inside or the outside?
inside.
Inside. Beautiful stairway.
Yeah.
I was on that stairway when the waterfall came down.
Yeah, she was on the second floor in a class when the tornado hit.
Economics.
Wow.
Yeah, it still baffles me that apparently no one was even
Incredible.
hurt
Even in
I
that
know.
whole state.
in
I
that.
know.
Well,
Yeah.
and some folks actually didn't
It was
even know
Tuesday. I mean,
that it
was
had
a
happened.
Thursday class.
Yeah.
Because there was
What-
classes in the lower level of Becknell, is that they weren't even aware that a tornado
Yeah,
hit the
yeah, some people-
campus.
In the science
In the
building.
office.
Yes, some people didn't know.
Yeah.
Here's what Dan West told me. Of course, this was his first year, and for some reason, Terrell may have actually have told me this. For some reason, Good Friday had been left off the academic calendar that year, and they were scheduled to have a class the next day on Good Friday. And of course, after the tornado strafed campus, they canceled class, and we've never had it. Yeah, that's right. So we got the message.
Mary Lou Oliver, who some of you knew, and whose husband was a teacher at college, she didn't like Dan West. And she just worried and stewed over Dan West, and she prayed that the college would be relieved of the burden of Dan West. And then the tornado came, and she said, "Well, I didn't intend the Lord to hit him with a stick of stone wood."
And he came through it too. He came through it. He's been one of their longest serving presidents.
Yeah, 16 years
Yeah.
he was there. Yeah, and quite a 16 years it was.
Yeah.
Maybe the most
Highly active.
eventful
Yeah.
16 years in the history of the college. Yeah.
Well, this has been a treat. Get to sit
It has
next
been.
to you and to learn from you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it.
Well done.